You're walking across an open grassland about 1.5 million years ago. The air smells like ozone, the sky just cracked open with lightning, and somewhere off in the distance, the dry grass is caught. Everyone in your group is doing the sensible thing, running, fast, away. Fire, at this point in human history, is not your friend. It's not your tool. It's a predator that doesn't need teeth. And then, at some point, someone stopped running. Today, fire is candles on a birthday cake. It's the little blue flame under your morning coffee. It's a bonfire you post on Instagram with a caption about vibes. We have so thoroughly tamed fire that we now pay extra for it to smell like vanilla. So how exactly did we go from screaming and sprinting away from a wall of flame to lighting scented candles in a bathroom? That's the question. When did ancient humans actually discover fire? And what does discover even mean here? Because here's the thing nobody tells you. Discovering fire wasn't one event. It wasn't a guy rubbing two sticks together in a flash of inspiration while everyone around him gasped. That image, the light bulb moment, the eureka spark, is basically fiction. The real story is slower, weirder, and happens in at least 3 separate stages, each one taking an absurdly long time to get to the next. Stage 1. Using fire that already exists. This is the easy part, relatively speaking. Wildfires happen constantly. Lightning strikes, dry grass burns, and afterward, there's a smoking, blackened landscape full of roasted animals that didn't get away in time. At some point, some early hominin walked through one of these burned areas and ate something that had been cooked by accident, and it was, apparently, great. The earliest solid evidence for this kind of opportunistic fire use comes from sites like Koobi Fora in Kenya, with burned patches of earth dating back roughly 1.5 million years, right around the time of early Homo erectus. We're talking about a species with a brain about 2/3 the size of ours, who nonetheless seems to have figured out that the aftermath of a fire was, weirdly, worth sticking around for. But scavenging burned ground after a wildfire is not the same as having fire. It's the difference between finding free food on the sidewalk and owning a kitchen. Stage 2. Keeping fire alive. This is where things get genuinely interesting, and it's also where the evidence gets a lot more convincing. The site that usually comes up here is Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, dating back roughly 1 million years. Inside the cave, archaeologists found burnt bone and ash deep inside, in a spot where a wildfire simply could not have reached on its own. Wildfires don't wander into caves and set up camp. Something brought that fire in there. Something kept it burning. And that's a completely different cognitive task than just walking past a smoking field. To keep a fire alive, you have to feed it. You have to understand that it needs fuel, that it dies without air, that it can be carried, smothered, and revived. You have to treat fire less like a hazard and more like a living thing that needs looking after, which, frankly, it kind of does. This is the era of firekeepers, not fire makers. For an enormous stretch of human history, probably hundreds of thousands of years, the trick wasn't creating fire from nothing. It was never letting it go out. Groups likely carried smoldering embers from camp to camp, the way you'd carefully carry a candle through a windy hallway, cupping your hand around the flame, terrified of the dark that would follow if it died. One of the strongest examples of sustained, repeated fire use comes from Gesher Beno Yaakov in Israel, dating back around 790,000 years, where archaeologists found evidence of fire use across multiple layers of occupation in the same spots over and over. Not a one-off, a habit, a practice, something that had become part of how this group lived, generation after generation. And here's where the story stops being just about fire and starts being about us. There's a theory popularized by anthropologist Richard Wrangham called the cooking hypothesis. The basic idea is that cooked food is dramatically easier to digest than raw food. Cooking breaks down tough fibers, denatures proteins, and unlocks calories that would otherwise pass straight through you, mostly unused. Once our ancestors started reliably cooking food, their guts could get smaller because digestion got easier, and freeing up that energy, the energy that used to go toward digesting raw meat and tough plants, may have helped fuel the growth of something else entirely, the brain. Which raises a genuinely strange question. Did fire make us human? Or did becoming human make fire possible? Because you need a certain level of planning, memory, and cooperation just to keep an ember alive across days and journeys. But having fire might be exactly what gave us the spare biological budget to develop that planning, memory, and cooperation in the first place. It's a loop. Fire helped make the kind of brain that could understand and use fire better, which then used fire more, which then helped that brain even more. Evolution doesn't care about chickens or eggs. It just keeps the loop running if the loop works. Stage 3. Actually making fire on demand. This is the part most people assume came first, and it's actually the part that came staggeringly late. For most of the timeline we've just walked through, hundreds of thousands of years, there's very little solid evidence that humans could reliably create fire from scratch whenever they wanted it. What they could do was maintain it, transport it, and use it skillfully once they had it. But starting a fire from nothing on a cold, wet night with no embers left from yesterday, that's a much harder problem. Some of the clearest evidence for deliberate, repeated fire making comes from Koobi Cave in Israel, where archaeologists found hearths used again and again in the exact same location over what appears to be centuries. That kind of consistency suggests something beyond luck. It suggests a method, a repeatable process, something closer to a skill that could be taught. By the time we get to Neanderthals, tens of thousands of years ago, we start finding actual fire-starting kits, pieces of pyrite and flint found together, showing wear patterns consistent with being struck against each other to throw sparks. That's a toolkit. That's someone who didn't just know fire was useful. They knew exactly how to make more of it on purpose whenever they needed it. So here's the question that should be sitting in the back of your mind. If fire is so obviously useful, why did it take so long, hundreds of thousands of years, between using it and reliably making it? The honest answer is that access was never really the problem. Lightning strikes the planet about 8 million times a day. Fire is not rare. The hard part was control, keeping something inherently dangerous and unpredictable alive without it burning down your camp or going out the moment it started raining. The hard part was understanding fire well enough, intimately enough, to eventually reproduce it from raw materials whenever the old fire failed. And once humans cracked that, everything changed again. Fire wasn't just warmth and cooked food anymore. It was light after dark, which meant the day effectively got longer. Researchers studying modern hunter-gatherer groups, like the Juhwansi in southern Africa, have found that conversations after dark, around a fire, are noticeably different from daytime talk. Less complaining about logistics, more storytelling, myth, humor, social bonding. Fire didn't just extend the day, it created an entirely new kind of time. A time specifically for the things that make us feel human. So next time you flick a lighter without thinking about it, casually, in under a second, you're doing something that took our ancestors over 1 million years to fully figure out. Stage 1 was an accident. Stage 2 was a responsibility. Stage 3 was a technology. And you're walking around with the end result of all 3 in your pocket. If you'd lived through that whole 1 million-year process yourself, which stage do you think you'd have figured out first? Let me know in the comments. Until then, see you soon.